Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. We're going to try and keep you awake after lunch. It's always, sleepy time. So we're here to give you a little bit of an overview of the strategic instruction model, otherwise known as SIM, because we love acronyms and we use them all the time, right? And a little introduction for you. We kind of wanted to get a sense, how many of you have never heard of SIM, Strategic Instruction Model? Okay, that's good. So you're here, you're going to... Okay. How many of you have heard of it, a little bit about it, but you haven't used it? Okay. How many of you, is anyone using SIM, Strategic Instruction Model, in their classrooms? Okay, that gives us a little bit of an idea. So for our time together today, we planned it this way. We're going to talk a little bit about what it is, what exactly is SIM. We're going to talk about a few things that might encourage you to adopt. Why would you want to adopt SIM in your spaces? How it can be implemented. Lisa's going to share a story of implementation. It's always nice to hear from, what's going on in classrooms, people implementing. And then we'll give you a couple of resources about, if you want to learn more, where you can go to find out more information. So SIM comes out of the Center for Research on Learning. There's so many centers, I want to make sure I get that right. So the Center for Research on Learning out of the University of Kansas. And it was developed after years of research being conducted to develop an integrated model of instruction for diverse learners in our classrooms. It focuses in on adolescent learners, so we're looking at our older students who are bumping into content and academic text that has more challenges, more robust vocabulary, more complex ideas, and it's really helping to support them in their literacy growth. So I want you to think of literacy in a broad sense, not just learning to read, but reading, speaking, listening, and writing. So that goes across all content. It's not just ELA. We have to learn how to read, write, speak, and listen in all content areas and subject areas. So this is for all content areas. The goals of SIM are these four. They're really what we measure our success by, what we measure our students' success by. We want them to be able to learn and do well independently. We want them to be able to be socially invested in the learning community that they have in their classrooms. We want them to, of course, graduate from high school and then be successful in whatever they transition into after high school. So I want you to take some time, just individually, to think about, if you know an adolescent, if you have one at home, if you work with them all the time, what are some challenges that you've seen adolescents may have in their content areas in respect to reading, writing, speaking, and listening? So just take a couple of minutes to jot down or think in your head, and I'll time you down to 3, 2, 1, and then we will kind of share a little bit. Another 15 seconds. Okay, and finish up whatever you're writing or thinking about in 3, 2, 1. Okay, since we have such a small, intimate group, I think we can have you share out, and Jeannie will pass around the microphone. Because we're recording, we want to make sure that everybody can hear. So anybody want to share a challenge? You can just share one. Okay, Jeannie's going to run up to you. Thank you. You can share a couple.
It's a very short list.
Okay.
Challenges. Matching speaking to writing. So what they say isn't always what they're able to write down. Then expanding on the writing. Adding more. Listening to others, like not tuning them out. And then confidence to speak. Having the confidence, especially in adolescence, right? They want to kind of like shy.
Right. Thank you so much for that. Anybody else who's got someone in the back there, Jeannie, and then all the way up in front, and I can grab him.
So I teach social studies, and I'm noticing a lack of background knowledge and experiences with life, which is really difficult when you're trying to understand about different world cultures and religions and things like that.
Thank you. I saw a lot of nodding heads on that one. Thanks.
So I also teach social studies. But I know some of the stuff that I'm seeing is like just because of everything with COVID and everything, the reading gap is down. Reliance on computers a lot, so handwriting is down. Speaking, the social emotional wellness is just completely shot. There's very little empathy. And then listening, who needs to listen when you have a computer with games on it right in front of you 24/7?
Thank you for that. Yes. Anybody else want to share out something that hasn't already been said? Lisa?
I was just thinking about at the middle school, high school level, just the amount of time it takes to be able to teach new skills, trying to get around scheduling problems.
And so I'll ask the follow-up. How many of you have seen disengagement? How many of you are seeing kids who are struggling with reentry? So they've been out, maybe then they extended that by a half a year to a year before, and they ran down an online system, which is leading to more gaps, and they're getting represented to you, and they're really not there.
Thank you for that brainstorming and sharing out a lot of important points that you're sharing, that you're seeing. So when we think about academic success, there are building blocks to that. And these touch on a lot of the things that you mentioned in that short period of time of listing. And that bottom building block is the foundation of everything. It's language. When we're first born, we learn to listen first. We learn to listen to be able to speak, to be able to express ourselves, to be able to begin to understand what the adults in our lives who love us are saying, to be able to express the things that we need, our frustrations, our disagreements, our agreements, our celebrations, all of that. So language is really that bottom foundational piece that needs to be strong to be able to get us onto that success. Skills and strategies are on top of that. So skills, those unconscious abilities we have to be able to do something well, to help ourselves. And strategies are a plan of action or a technique that you have learned that you choose to employ to help yourself solve a problem or do well at a task. Subject matter knowledge, I think some of you had mentioned that, is critical. We need to have that background knowledge. We need to have key ideas and critical content of all of our content areas to be able to do that higher order thinking, problem solving, reading multiple texts and summarizing and assimilating information, drawing conclusions, making predictions, forming an argument, an opinion with evidence. So that higher order thinking is, that's our goal. We want to be able to get to that. I'm going to throw it to you. Do you want to add anything to that, Lisa? Okay.
I think the only thing that I'll add is integrated skills. Mm-hmm. I think what we don't see is the cross-content integration. We don't see I do this in ELA, and then I go over to social studies and I do the same thing. So something as simple as I will write a complete sentence. In social studies, we've got social studies and science and content area teachers that are done with the fight, but I haven't met a 7th grade English teacher that has that fight. So the transfer of those skills across content areas and grade levels and helping kids to understand like how all this comes together, and that we don't just do these things in one place. This is how we look. This is what we do in all the places.
Thank you. So SIM is evidence-based instruction, and it is comprised of two different components. So SIM offers something called content enhancement routines, which are a collection of tools that teachers can use to plan their instruction and to share and teach that instruction in a way that is clear and more easy to understand for their diverse learners in their classroom. And we'll talk about it a little more specifically. Then the other component that SIM offers is learning strategies. And that is a collection of strategies that are also tools teachers can use, but there's a gradual release of that responsibility for students to learn that strategy and be able to do well with it and choose it as an option to help them understand more complex text in any content area. So content enhancement routines, again, these are tools for teachers. They're dynamic, and they have to have in place engagement with the students. So it's a partnership of that routine that is happening that teachers use, but it's in partnership with students. And mastering critical content. It includes routines that are systematic and direct instruction, but again, that engagement with students is what makes it more powerful. This is a unit organizer of all of the content enhancement routines that are available through SIM, and you can see, maybe you can't see because it seems a little blurry and I'm really close to it up here, but it's in different categories. So the first grouping of content enhancement routines have to do with planning and leading. So a course organizer, a unit organizer, a lesson organizer allow teachers to plan their instruction in a way that is organized for students to be able to understand that content, be able to see relationships in the content throughout a unit, throughout a lesson, throughout a course. The next one is concepts, so maybe helping to students to understand concepts, explaining text, topics, and details. There's one that's specific to vocabulary. There's increasing performance, and there's the higher order thinking you can see all the way over to the right. So this is a wide collection of content enhancement routines that teachers can use to help with their instruction in the classroom. Content enhancement routines help students to be able to understand that content, the literacy demands that are growing as students are growing older in their classrooms. It provides guidance for teachers to use before, during, and after reading. It offers opportunities for teachers to model their thinking and processing of text, and then focus on that classroom talk, that language in the classroom about the content. Learning strategies is that other component that was on the right-hand side. And those are designed to help students understand content in 3 different ways. So strategies and skills taught to help students acquire the knowledge that is being taught, to be able to somehow store that information that they're learning, to be able to retrieve it later when they need it, and then also to demonstrate their understanding of the teaching. So learning strategies support students in all of these ways. I think about the bottom one specifically, that executive functioning, to be able to, I've got all these strategies, I've learned these strategies, and now I can have the choice. I'm gaining independence in making a choice of what strategy to use in social studies, in science, in math, in English. So here's a side-by-side comparison. Content enhancement routines, learning strategies. You can see content enhancement routines, teacher-focused, whereas learning strategies are more student-focused once learned and that responsibility is released. This helps to have teachers really decide, using that content enhancement routines, what am I going to teach, in what order, how deep am I going to go? It supports teachers in presenting content and students in learning and understanding the content. You can see learning strategies, it's helping students in that learning community to be able to be engaged in a learning community, learning from print, and organization. I don't think I heard anybody say that one of the challenges is organization, and I think with adolescents, that happens a lot, right? That not only organizing your materials and all of your things, but organizing your thinking in a way that helps you to remember key content. So MTSS, we know that's a comprehensive framework to support students in academics and behavior and that social emotional learning, and SIM employs all of those areas as well. So it is a nice fit in an MTSS framework. We know we've got our triangle for tiered supports, and when we think about, well, where would SIM fit in the triangle to support students? When we think about learning strategies, those really fit nicely in a tier 2, tier 3 support. There's specific strategies to help students who need some more intensive support. And the content enhancement routines, remember those teacher tools to help plan and implement instruction. So those really fit nicely in that tier 1 because it's for all students. So as a wrap up, just in terms of SIM, it's really supporting teacher planning and team planning. Imagine a social studies team all gathering together to do a unit organizer and make decisions about what's the critical content we're going to teach in this unit, what are the outcomes that we want, and they're aligning that across their team. It makes a huge impact for students. Student learning and planning, these routines and strategies help students to organize their thinking around topics for that improvement of student outcomes. So that's a lot. So knowing that you've got 2 components of SIM, a lot of choices in the routines and in the strategies, but you can only start with one, right? You've got to start somewhere. And so Lisa's going to share a story of implementation with one school, one teacher.
One district. It was a whole district. I want that one. I don't need to. Yeah, nobody needs to hear me twice. I'm probably loud enough that I don't need this. But so what I wanted to share with you, I apologize. I have a weird tickle in my throat. I guess that's just what's happening right now. I think for me, my background was something that illuminated a problem in secondary that I had no idea existed in secondary because I was a teacher for, almost 15 years. And I taught in 2 very contrasting districts. I taught in a very urban, difficult district. Kids had a lot of challenges, came to us for, a lot of different reasons. And within that district, I worked between 1st grade and all the way up to 7th and 8th grade. I had, some very scary moments with some very frustrated kiddos. Does that make sense? And rightly so that they were frustrated. And then I went out to the county and I worked in a much smaller setting with kids who, were coming from different situations, but then I still had frustrated kiddos. What I learned is that my background in training was an LEd degree, but I taught the majority of my teaching, 2/3 of my teaching was in middle schools. And what was always very interesting was butting an elementary teacher up against a secondary trained teacher. Because an elementary teacher, an elementary person, gets several methods courses. We learn how to teach kids science. We learn how to teach kids social studies. We learn how to teach kids math and create and write lessons. And we have lots of conversations about, did this lesson go appropriate, and lesson reflection, and all of this kind of stuff. My secondary colleagues, who I adore, had a whole bunch of content courses. And they got one methods course that kind of was like the loop around, and usually one course in special education. And that was kind of it. You're nodding. I'm assuming that means that's what you got too. Okay, so you've got to deal with children now and teach them the subject that you love. And oh, by the way, 10% of them like history, 4% of them like science, and they're going to have to do math anyway. So what has happened in consulting with some of our secondary teams is that SIM came around through a middle school grant. So SIM came to us, Patton, and a couple of our middle school, our IU partners, as a grant that said, we have this cache and depending on where you're from, it's cache or cache, but yeah, I know, of information or resources for you to pick from. And so if you think about that giant organizer, there's all these different things. So what we did is I have a district, and we had a certain scope and sequence of things that we had to be able to do to be certified to train these things and whatever else. So I approached a district and I said, hey, I need to figure out what this is going to do. I'd like to do an exploratory implementation and see how this works. Does this actually work for you? How do you benefit from it? Whatever. So it wasn't systematic. But what we found through conversations, and it's a district that I'm very blessed, and my colleague Jeannie's been in there as well. They are right there with us to say, hey, if it's based in research, we're going to give it a shot. Let's try it. One of the reasons that they chose it was because there is, and the superintendent, who is no longer there, has moved on, said there is a bill that demands scope and sequence clarity. We want curriculum clarity. Don't know if it's going to go through, don't know if it's going to happen, don't know what's going on, but we probably need to get a little bit more clear about what our curriculum is and what it looks like and what the scope and sequence is. He's like, and I feel like, because we had looked at a lot of PBIS data, we're not well aligned. So I want to see how we could get aligned. The second part that we had is we had a lot of discussions, and I want to offer this. If you had to boil your content into a final exam, what 10 questions are the most important things? What are the 10 questions every 7th grader in social studies experience needs to have to move to 8th grade social studies experience? Now thinking middle school, civics, geography, right? That was usually how it went. And then it was history. So what history do they need to leave with in 8th grade to be able to go into, A-push? What are you giving them? What do they need out of your 8th grade curriculum in science that gets them okay enough to survive the test that's asking them about eukaryotics in the high school? So what 10 big essay questions would you want a kid to be able to answer? And what we found when we asked that question in this, like, what are the 10 things you want your kids to know? Sometimes we got responses like, they know how to respect me. Well, that's not content. So what he started to realize was the other part of the conversations when the content area teachers were together is if I knew what the 7th grade teacher was doing, I could build up. I could say, these are your 10. I'll take these 10. So that's what he was really looking for. That's what the curriculum director ended up looking for. And then inside of those 10, if that's your 10 units, right? We think there's 10 units. Now, what are the big concepts within each unit? So break those down into 5 questions. So you've got 10 units, big things that you have to understand, long-lasting things. And then you have these 5 sub-aspects that you want to take a look at. The second thing is what he had seen, the superintendent had seen, was he had seen a lot of students pulling away. That's why I mentioned it before. And I'm seeing that consistently. We see that with attendance rates not bouncing back. We've got attendance rates that are still sliding. We're seeing graduation rates that are kind of hovering at, okay, and at any moment they could fall off a hill in high school. And what was happening sometimes in the feedback from students that he was getting, because he would have student panels, he's like, why do I care what we learn? Nobody cares what I think we should learn in English. Nobody cares what I think what we should learn in, whatever. So how can we pull students into some of that because research is well written, especially in secondary, that if there is better engagement, if there's choice, if there's some sort of shared ownership, if there's some sort of collaboration. The second thing was the students were like, we don't even know what's important or why it's there. Right? So what are the important things that I got to take from the guy who's talking at me for 45 minutes about the greatest battle as they heave-hauled a wheelbarrow across a hill to get it to the next battle? I heard that lecture. Not that it was, and he just compared it to a wheelbarrow, and then he said, add 50 pounds, and now it's cannon. And I thought, he spent 42 minutes on it. The other thing is, and no criticism, I am secondary ELA. I have read more Shakespeare than any of you. I've read the other guys, George Bernard Shaw, all those guys. I love poetry and prose. I get it. Many systems are set up to do a year and a half of Shakespeare. You start with a unit in 7th grade, you do units all the way through to grade 12. You've done a year and a half of Shakespeare. What do you have to show for it? So when you think about that for a kid, those concepts, like if Shakespeare is going to be an important dude for us, what do we need to know about him? And am I getting there? And then thinking about UDL. And that was the other thing. There is a lot of talking about how we can start to do better practices to provide access for students of all learning needs. Executive skill needs, learning needs for reading and writing and math and all that. How can we start to have activities that are more inclusive? And then, how do we know from those activities the kids are actually learning? Does that sound fair as well? So these were the reasons for student involvement that he's like, okay, so this is good. But the sweet spot for getting our teacher buy-in was the flexibility. The SIM strategies are not designed to be rote. Your social studies teacher gets a framework that he or she or they may leverage a little bit differently than the science teacher. It's framework driven with some choices that can be made at district level, building level, teacher level. But there are just some basic components that you want to do that. The other thing that it was good was, and the reason he really liked it, and the admin team liked it, and then even the teachers, because I'll tell you in a minute how this was decided upon what we chose, is that it could be done in any content area. Health, wellness, art, gym, math. And the best part is, what they really liked is, oh, you mean the kids are going to know how they're doing? Yeah. The worst thing, and it's just my opinion as a parent of 3 teenagers, one who's in university and the other one who's graduating this year and the other one who's got 2 years left. So yes, they were packed into a small span of time. And I am just ending the last 3 years of high school. And as sad as it is in some ways, I'm really excited to get out of there. Just saying. I have no idea what they're doing. And I go home and I said, Case, how's it going? She's like, I failed my math test. I'm like, why? She's like, I don't know. I failed it. I'm like, what did you do? She's like, I just messed up a whole bunch of this stuff. Now, she's got a great math teacher. He's one of my favorite humans. She's even said he's better at explaining math to her than anyone else. She has a reading disability. So her problem on sometimes the test is she mixes up the language. And so she'll go back in and she gets some opportunities. But she's moved away from the wanting to have it read to her because she doesn't want anyone knowing. So, and I'm her mom. So of course, you know, the cobbler's children has no shoes. So when we had all these kinds of conversations, we met in late May of last year to talk about with the admin how this would fit into an MTSS implementation framework in secondary. The biggest problem in the district is ELA in middle school, in their PBIS scores. It was like glaringly apparent it was falling down. And they are the first ones to admit, we're not going to admire the problem anymore, we need to take action. What are some things that we can do? And so they were looking at standards aligned and going through some of those things. They liked the idea of SIM because there was a little bit of an accountability. We could turn it into standards aligned. We could do some different things. And so they chose 3 different things to present to the teachers and offered the faculty a half a day to come in and choose. And basically, where would you like to start? So then we ran, and the teachers picked which ones they liked and which ones they felt would be very, very good for their programming. Then in July, I sat down and I trained. It was a day of training. The SIM trainings are a full day. There's an administrative training actually, but then we had a full day of training for the first. What we ended up implementing was the unit organizer, and you'll see that in just a minute. So there was a day to train the unit organizer. And in August, we had a follow-up meeting, and the teacher said, can she come back? Which is always good as a facilitator to be like, oh, all right, yeah, I'll come back. We would like some coaching, please. So what we decided in August was that we were going to do a little bit of coaching around this strategy. So we went back through And every month we kind of made an implementation plan for how we were going to do things. Like everything in life, implementation plans look really great and then go left, right? So we were like, by January, we're going to have kids doing this. We're going to have 3 units by the end of the year. We'll have curriculum at the end. It'll be great. We'll roll over to this in the fall. Yeah, and then there's a snowstorm. I live in Northwest Pennsylvania, so there's lots of snowstorms up there. And so it took us a while to kind of get through everything. But we went back through. They selected a cohort of teachers that crossed curriculum. So there was 2 social studies teachers, one who was the economics teacher. He did like the hard sciences of social studies. And then the social studies teacher that my child thinks is always the greatest human on the face of the world, who tells through stories and art and dance lessons, I think, sometimes. But he loves kids, and he's in it for the kids, and there's just this real understanding. Then we had a science teacher who was the keystone science teacher. She has the biology assignment. And she had one period of co-teaching, so her co-teacher came to that one as well. So they could do both her course and the co-taught course. So how they wanted to compare how it worked for gen ed alone versus gen ed with special ed embedded. Does that make sense? And they'd been co-teaching. It's a co-teaching model. We get a little trepidatious around co-teaching because co-teaching, just done well by research standards, you need to have co-planning time. Otherwise, it's really difficult to not have a model where you have one in the front and one in the back. This model, these 2 women have been doing that together for about 10 years. So it was a really embedded, well-driven model. So then they decided that by November, they wanted to have their class model, their teacher version. So the first step in the program is that you learn the routine, and as you're learning the routine, you create your own organizer. Then we started talking about, then they started to collaborate. So they had lots of different models and they worked with each other. And the 2 social studies teachers who had 2 very different content areas started to realize that they were having these curricular conversations. And they're like, wait, if we could just, well, this is great. Let's align these 2. And the biology teacher is then talking to the English teacher saying, well, this was my project. What do you do when they have something like this? So it just kind of gently lended itself, not a forced way, to having those cross-curricular, cross-grade level, content level questions. So then we started to do what we called refinements. So they would submit basically a draft, and then we would make notes on it and kind of say, hey, here's where you can improve. Did you think about this? And there are some trickier parts. It doesn't really matter. Because I don't want to focus solely on the unit routine. I just want to say the plan was we're going to learn it, and then we're going to coach you around it, and then we're going to get some drafts together, and then we're going to help you refine it so you feel really comfortable with your unit organizer, and then we're going to roll it out to kids. We're not going to have you going out to kids with this where you're not feeling really comfortable. We'll roll it out to kids, and there's a specific way that SIM likes these routines rolled out. They call it floating the model. So you kind of start into the model, and you explain to the kids what this organizer is and why they're going to be using it, and you kind of help them work through the first one. And then you implement it. And then the second one is, the first one's very teacher-led. The second one becomes now more collaborative. Does that make sense? What you see, and so here's where it kind of was like in January and February, different teachers were in different levels of needs. So we MTSS'd them. These teachers were like, we're good. These 6, okay, I'm like, you're core. So they kind of moved on their own trajectory. This one other teacher was having some barriers just on time. Was a teacher who did a lot of coaching, had a lot of kids in his classroom. So just slowed down and had some more, and just needed a little bit more of a timeline. And the last teacher was terrified of implementation. She needed a model. She needed somebody to go in and float the thing for her. And so what was really nice and very gracefully, she got a chance to observe the science teacher do it, who was very comfortable, like off the bat. And not only that, then the science teacher did one for her within her classrooms. And then she did it in pieces, like she did the front of it or the back of it. And we would meet to talk about what successes we had, what challenges we had, what was working, what wasn't. As we got into April, the woman you'll see on there, her name is Joy, was flying. And she was like, I've seen this, 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 this. And most of them had managed to move into getting it implemented. My favorite comment during that time was, I have just saved myself 4 days of instruction. And I said, what do you mean? She said, and I don't think her thing is in here because she actually moved out of the district, of course. But what she did was she always did a unit on transcendentalism. Yeah, look it up. It's okay. Because I had to, and I'm an English teacher, and so was she. But she had a whole unit on transcendentalism, and part of a unit organizer is you get the name of the unit, and then you have your topics. And the kids help to design like the major concepts. You as a teacher guide them, but the kids kind of help design the concepts. So she did a 7-minute web search so that they could access and build this beginning match. What happened was, she said what they did such a nice job of grouping these concepts into what they wanted to learn. I eliminated 4 days of background building because the kids were pulling in information from social studies. The kids were asking, how do these books relate to the time period? How do these books, who are the authors that are important during the transcendentalism? She's like, I got back a considerable amount of instructional time and could focus on the higher order. Now it was an honors 10th grade unit. So she loved that, and I would have loved that because I think sometimes what they had said is they often underestimated what their kids would be able to pull in. And sometimes it was very unexpected who were the kids that were pulling in all this knowledge from all these different spaces. And then in May and June, we had some time to do some reflections. We decided to kind of think about, do we want to continue this? Do we want to roll it out to staff? What's this going to look like? And they are now 4 ambassadors, and the rollout plan is just now starting for the fall because we've had some large level administrative changes in the district. So they're going to roll it out in the high school, kind of headed in towards January. But then in the middle school, they're going to start it in April. So they're actually expanding beyond. So they've got these 4 people who are invested and want to be able to help coach across and build that internal capacity across grade levels. And so, but they dropped the 7th grade originally, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, because the teacher said we can't do it right now. We have too many barriers. We got to do intervention. We've got other priorities. We can't do 3 things. And we said, okay, we'll wait. And now they're feeling like a little bit better with it. So just to show you very quickly, this is one of the options. This is called the unit organizer. The unit organizer, the first step, of course, was that teacher creating one. So the teacher created it. What the unit organizer does, do you have a little dotty on this?
No, I don't
Oh,
have that.
so you have this bigger picture concept. So what is the big picture concept that she's trying to get across? And that's poetry. Then you think about what did they learn before our current unit. So if this is our current unit, what knowledge links to it? Now, what do you think the history guy figured out? Where was his knowledge coming from? So, him? No. His knowledge is coming from middle school. Right? What about the math teacher? Grade level topic before. Right? So if it's the Algebra 2 teacher, he might have kids from 7th grade. He's got to link the Algebra 1 concept. So what was really nice from a secondary standard, or a standpoint, is that an understanding of content being along a scope and sequence. Because then what were they doing next? And this unit sometimes was within the same grade level, and sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes it was in an AP course. Because if it was an honors, they took their honors courses, turned them into pre-AP. That was more of a philosophical shift. One of the things that people had said was they really wanted to stop having to feel like they had to teach AP something in a semester. So really your honors courses, they realigned them so that the honors teachers were heading standards that were going to come up on the AP exams. So they kind of tried to realign some of that. Now, the second part of it is this unit schedule. This was one of the pieces of flexibility. Some teachers did it with dates. You'll see that. Some teachers did it with concepts, and some teachers did it with assignments. Some teachers got really nervous about putting dates. Like, what if I don't have this on the right day? What happens? So some of them built it with like the next 3 with the kids at a time. Does that make sense? Like they got worried that they were going to have to cross out dates and parents were going to yell at them. They also have this way of saying, okay, our current unit a long way down is about. So in one statement, think about that question I asked you about. For your one unit, what is the sentence answer in a thesis statement to that question? So for your unit 1 in your econ, what's the big idea you want your people to know? This sentence should answer that. So then you do that, is about, and then it connects to the bigger concepts, right? So the long way down is about a young teenager who struggles with a decision related to the cycle of violence in his community. And the way that they're going to do that, they're going to learn that through paired text and prose and a graphic novel in different aspects. They're going to learn that using mind maps for each floor of the elevator ride. They're going to learn that by analyzing each character's impact on Will, and they're going to demonstrate their understanding with that end of the book concept project. So she treated those subtopics very much like here were the steps within how you're going to share what you learned. The power down here was, these are your 3 takeaway. At the end of the unit, these are my 3 big questions. So if I can answer these 3, I should pass my unit test. And each one of them links into, they call it a relationship. So are we doing analogies? Are we doing comparisons? Are we doing sequence? What are we doing? You know, so your science courses are going to be compare contrasting a lot, right? History is going to be an incredibly sequential kind of thing, cause effect. A lot ends up down there. So what we heard, oh yeah, there she is. I even wrote it in there. I forgot I wrote that in there. I did this a long time ago, Andra. But this was what she actually said. She was so excited about the higher level content. The other thing that another one said that I like the flexibility so that we can do it our own way. It's static, but my kids can follow it. I will say this, the comment that I did not, 2 things. This comment was, I was surprised. I didn't think it was worth the time. I did it because we needed a rep, and he was literally the econ guy. He's the lead for social studies, so whatever you call that, department head, department chair, whatever. And he didn't want someone within his department to do something unless he was doing it too. So he came willingly with reservations, right? So I was surprised. I didn't think it was worth the time, but students did a really good job of keeping track of their learning. When we went to the test prep day, they went through the questions and answered them. Look, and he's not, your econ teachers are not typically vivacious, boisterous humans. He's like, look, they put check marks. And I went, that's a lot of excitement out of an unexpected place. So he felt like he wanted to control the questions. He had 8, I could only get him down to 8. Because every unit needed 8 questions, which I'm not going to fight with you. But the child went through and checkmarked every single one and then flipped it over because the back is about like monitoring your own learning and answered each one of those questions. And even said, I'm answering on the unit map, I'm answering because of the self-test questions. So it was a tool for the kiddo to keep track of what they were learning and were they on track for understanding what the most important thing is. Now, if you were in Mark Shin's session, remember he said this is important and this is a story. It made me think about this is telling the kid this is important and reminding them this is a story. So The only other one that I will tell you about a teacher and what the teacher, one of the things before you get to hear from Joy, one of the teachers had said to me about this whole process was, I can't do this with a novel. Anybody want to guess why? Because novels often don't have enough meat. In high school, what we're supposed to be doing in ELA is making connections of literature to the world around us. So you can't just sit in the novel. You got to go out. You got to make connections. You got to get this other stuff. Now, one of the ELA teachers asked if she could put all of the vocabulary, the top 12 vocabulary words in here, and we asked her to put it in a bubble, because I went back to Sim and asked, through appropriate vocabulary choices. And then she had the ability to talk about the pieces of the vocabulary that she liked. So I do want to give you Joy for a minute or so, and I'm keeping track of my time, I promise, because we've got 15 minutes left. But Joy is one of the greatest people to hear from, right?
Hi, I've been using the unit plan strategy for a little over a year now. I've used it with 10th grade biology students, and the feedback that I received at the end of the year last year was overwhelmingly positive. And that was an exciting thing for me to see, because I had found that the unit plans had been very beneficial to me and my planning, specifically laying out the learning targets in an order that made sense. It's something that I work on every year, and the unit plan has definitely helped me to see the big picture of a unit in a very specific visual way.
So we asked Joy to record, mostly because it was difficult to get so many people here all the time. But so this was one of the other unit organizers. I wanted to show you another one. This one has the words. We do ask that they put the words to connect to the idea. And here's the word choice. That was part of the vocabulary one. And then again, now what happens is this is a student created. So this teacher took their template and has students on creating their own. So what Joy has done is she has some kids with AT, and they go in and they just do these for the other kids, because they're really good at using assistive tech. And so they'll just share it. So they develop it collaboratively as a class, and the kids who are leveraging text-to-speech go in there, they added their pieces, and then they sent it out to the class, and everybody got a copy. So it was a very interesting way that she had rolled it out. And then at the end, when they're going through and they're taking this side and they're turning it in, now it's a personalized situation. How do I monitor my own learning? So Sim will recommend, and you'd see that these would have like blowouts underneath them, and this would be gone. And she chose to say, you draw your own map. Some kids drew completely different things. You saw the child who was doing the list. That was a district decision. We don't need to have a map on the back that says that you taught everything, that you had flexibility to ask your students to do it how they wanted to, which was kind of neat. So I just want to make sure that you see. Wait, hang on. So this was that same unit organizer and some of the information, and Joy is going to share with you just some of the student things. And then
one of the things that the students liked best was that the left-hand side of the unit plan always has the schedule. And I did include dates and major assignments in that left-hand side. And what we found is that with those dates, they were able to plan ahead. Students in my class work at their own pace and path, and that allowed them to know where they should be, if they should be doing some self-assigned homework, where they should be going to, if there was going to be some events that they were going to have to miss school for, they knew what to plan for, and they knew how to prepare. So that was some of the feedback that I got from the students. In addition, I had a student just tell me the other day that switched to my room from another classroom that he really enjoys. No, I shouldn't say that. He said, your class is easy. And he said, I really enjoy the layout of the class. I understand so much more in here compared to my last class. Thank you.
So one of the things that we did was kind of go out, and what she did, which was really cool because she's a data person, she's a scientist, she likes data. So what she liked to do was basically say, I want information from the kids. So she put a survey out at the end of the year, and I'll show you some of the ABCD choice ones. But then she had a place in there where kids could enter their comments. So when we think about the big buckets from the first part, the idea of supporting organizing time and learning. So one of the things that I have personally seen on Peg Dawson, if you haven't read Smart But Scattered, it's a fantastic book. She's a phenomenal researcher. She does a lot around executive skills, not ADHD, executive skills on their biological development pathways for all humans. And she actually highlights some of how people have strengths in areas and people have weaknesses in some areas, and how to balance those. She does that to help support teachers. She does that elementary, but she's got a great teenager book, and she's got a great teacher book. So when we think about the executive skill of organizing time and learning, Jeannie and I have worked together for 10 years, not my strength for sure. Does that make sense? But I like the unit plan because it helps me to stay organized and on schedule. A kid said it, unsolicited. I enjoyed having an outline, knowing where I should go. I like how there's a schedule every day. Kids like schedules and routines. They like to know what's going on, and often we're not telling them. Trust me. Why? So that was a big aha moment for me too, because I love making schedules. The unit organizer helped me to know the major topics I needed for the quiz. This is that content knowledge. This is that overarching. Kids were really glad because before you hop right into the next unit, you go over and summarize what you did in the last one. And you connect them. It's going to talk about showing what they learned about through a topic. So understanding the content, the core needs, and the connections. And we're on the literacy team, the three of us. Background knowledge is now one of the biggest buzzwords in reading. Kids who don't have background struggle also in vocabulary. It's a highly linked thing, and you can't really do a great job at comprehending something if you don't have background. If you've never been to a grocery store, how are you supposed to predict what Johnny does next after he fills his cart? So, the last one is student engagement and reflection on learning. So when we think about that big concept, what they want, what SIM is designed to do is to help them kind of say, here's where I am. And they like making the mind map. They liked having the questions. They liked to track their own progress. This was her co-taught room. So I can't tell you which were students who had differing abilities, but I can tell you I can tell you this is what the kids had said. Some of them. We just picked highlights. Lots of them are redundant. So overall, the student feedback, how well do you understand the actual unit plan organizer? Well, that was the results. No one didn't. By the end of the year, no one didn't understand it. And she implemented for 6 months, from January to June. Does the unit plan help you prepare for what's learning in the unit? So if you look at her courses, you can't see these numbers, but they're 2, 5, 5, 10, 12. Who are the 2? The ones who never needed it. But if you look at a median, there are 12 kids that are below, that are like in that, yeah, it helped, neutral, 12 kids neutral and below. And there are 22 kids in the above, yes, it helped me range. So for 2/3 of the student, it was an absolute benefit for them to understand their learning. The second bit is how often do you refer to the unit plan during the unit? Again, you've got 11 kids that are going in there every day, very, very frequently, somewhat frequently, not very often, never. So you have 7, 9, 16, 18 kids that are in that thing on a regular basis. And you have 16 of them that aren't leveraging it regularly. But then when you look at the end result, should we continue to use it? 76% of the kids said absolutely. So the time it took to do the unit, I think, was something that I asked Joy if she would go back and talk about. at first, the time it takes to implement one of these strategies is long. I'm sorry, that it's just hard. It's a shift, right? But once you get good at it, it's really fast. She whittled it down to about 10 minutes, 15 minutes when she rolled out a unit plan at the beginning of the unit. And then she would go back in and do like a 5-minute at the end of the day, check on your question 1. And the kids would do like a journal entry on question 1. So once she got good at it and she built fluency with it, it became really easy to implement. Oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
okay. So close your eyes while I go backwards. And Andrew can talk for a second. I wanted to go back to this map, and I forgot to put it back in the end of the PowerPoint. Unit organizer is here on this big map. It sits under the course organizer. So if we wanted to get persnickety, she could have had lessons for every single one of those concepts, right? But a lot of districts don't require daily lesson plans, but they do want a unit plan, and they do. And so she is now the next step for the high school and those people is to take all of their unit organizers and put them into their course organizer. So they're pulling those sentences out and just laying them down in a course organizer. Inside of this, it flows this way. So these are big. This is now a concept within the unit. This is now a technique to help you understand the concept inside of the unit. And now this is a strategy within the technique, within the concept to get to the unit. So as you're looking at SIM, what it does is it nests inside itself that you can go to, once you kind of get some of these, you can go that way. Or you can start here, teaching cause and effect because you've got a social studies teacher and you want kids to understand cause and effect, and you can go this way. Now, how does that relate to the concept you're teaching? How does that relate to that unit measure that you want?
And that goes back to saying they're teacher tools. So you can layer them in as you need them, or as you're seeing students may need a little bit more time understanding a certain concept, so you can go into that more deeply. Or you see through classroom conversation, oh, they already know that. So you can cut back on the time you spend detailing that. So that was just a story about one school implementing the unit organizer itself. I think it's important to note for those content enhancement routines that the teacher's creating it first because you want an idea of what you want to cover, but then the students and you are engaging together through conversation to develop their unit organizer with your guidance, and they're taking notes and learning and having conversation. To learn more about SIM, if you're interested, I don't know if any of you are National Public Radio lovers, but I love NPR, and there's a show called StoryCorps. It's all about people on there telling stories. SIM has its own StoryCorps, so you'll hear from people who are implementing, 1 or 2 people, or people doing professional development. That's a great way to learn about it. If you like a podcast, you can put it on in the car and listen to StoryCorps. And then if you flip to the next one.
Nope, wrong way, sorry.
The University of Kansas has its website, and so you can see that this, when you look at the strategic instruction model, you can see where there's content enhancement routines if you're interested in those more so. Right next to that is learning strategies. You can look at those and see the collection of learning strategies that are available to you. And I think...
And that's it. We wanted to make sure you had 15 minutes for questions if you want them. Yes, sir.
Hang on.
That's okay.
So I'm from Susquehanna Township Middle School, and we transitioned about 3-4 years ago to MCL, Mass Customized Learning. So a lot of our middle school classes, upper, lower elementary, and then pretty soon our high school, they might be mixed grades with different content areas. Is there anything with SIM that you are aware of that talks about, like either within a competency-based or prescription education model with having multi-grade levels?
Yeah, so I think that from my experience with something like the unit organizer or a course, right, that once they hit those mastery topics, so we talk a lot. I used to do gifted ed as well, because why not give people extra things to do sometimes? I had an extra homeroom period. Accelerating, right? So you've got kids in your buildings, in your districts, whose families are like, we're not accelerating enough. We need to grow our highest learners. If you can collapse those bottom 5 questions and answer this essay, here's this project. Extend your learning, or you move on to the next. So you could almost take that course organizer or that unit organizer as kids are moving in and out, and it wouldn't matter what grade it is because it's the concepts within it. Does that make sense? The ones that are farther down, framing, routine, compare, and contrast. There's a framing routine that is like, it's basically like a grouping. So if you think kindergarten and buttons is the only way that I can say, but the group is buttons, and in this category, these are the different type. These are my buttons. In this category, these are my buttons, and so it's a graphic organizer to help kids understand and group concepts into categories. And so they wouldn't matter what course it was. Does that make sense? You can go from the big picture to the finite, which is why it's pretty amazing, I think, is what we've kind of come to see at Patton. Oh, Jean's behind you.
So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Learning Focused Schools model.
No.
Okay, but Learning Focused Schools and SIMS are very, very similar. The advanced organizer, the acquisition lesson, and building and linking background knowledge and those kinds of things. So I guess my question is, there are other comprehensive approaches to developing curriculum out there. And so you might find elements of SIM in schools, like the unit organizer, if you're doing anything with Grant Wiggins,
Right.
Curriculum writing. So my question comes down to fidelity. Like I heard Dr. Shin this morning talk about, do SIM because you'll see the progress. Well, SIM is pretty complex. There's multiple pieces to it. And so I guess my question is, to what level of fidelity, are there checklists, and to what level of fidelity has the research shown needs to be implemented for it to have the impact that Dr. Shin was talking about this morning?
Do you want to?
I don't know if I can answer in terms of the research and what degree of implementation, but there are checklists for not only creating the devices, so to make sure that you're hitting all of those important parts of the unit organizer or the framing routine or whatever routine that you're using. And then there's also a checklist for when you're implementing each of the routines for fidelity as well. And so for coaching, those would be used in not only looking at your device and how it's created, but also how you're implementing that device in the classroom.
So how many routines do you feel need to be implemented with fidelity
So-
in order to get the results, I guess?
It depends on what you're looking for. and I'm going to be
Can you
honest.
repeat that? 'Cause
Sorry.
they won't.
How many routines need to be done with fidelity in order for us to be able to look at this model as an evidence-based practice?
So I think one of the things that had been done at the high school was they had mapped one of the curriculum team had mapped the science curriculum, for example. Does that make sense? They'd already done the teacher level mapping. And they had a lot of what you were saying earlier, like we have this, we have elements of this. It's the student engagement that SIM added. So they had the concepts, they had the ideas, but now the students were saying they had a voice and they had a way to map their own learning. So it wasn't just teacher given, it was student driven, which is a little bit of difference. What we see with SIM is to get that student engagement back, it's pretty quick. Kids don't get heard a lot in secondary. So as soon as they start having really great voice, that's part of the research that we see them starting to be willing to do some of this work, is that, hey, somebody listened to my opinion and thinks this is a good thing to do. The evidence that we have seen and the evidence that's within SIM is primarily driven special education, because this was a special education framework to start. But what is happening, just like 97 million other things in special education, what we do for the few sometimes becomes what we should be doing for the many. And so what has happened is it's just expanding. I think the other thing that I will say is every system knows their teachers. There are strong teachers who probably don't need a compare-contrast organizer to teach their kids compare-contrast. But you might have teachers who struggle with instructing compare and contrast concepts within their curriculum. Because again, they're just missing that foundational, how do I teach this? So I think it's more about the people that you have, the approach that you want to take, and kind of what your hope is to get out of it. The very finite question strategy, one of my favorite things is developing a scientific argument. So if you go back, we had to basically do a whole bunch of development of our own. We had to pick a different one that we hadn't been trained in, learn it, and then present it. My very, very favorite one, very, very favorite one is scientific argumentation. You know why? It actually helps kids understand if it's evidence-based, if it's a reliable, valid source. And so it supports the teacher in saying they can develop a lesson around how something is reliable or valid, or they can take that from an ELA curriculum. But then as a scientist, this is the reason that I'm going to be saying, this is the research I'm quoting. Does that make sense? So it takes you from one concept into another one. It's a long answer to a short question, but that's why he likes it. He likes it for the flexibility. He likes it because it's definitely driven, and he likes it because of student engagement. And this is something that I've seen teachers take to their kids and their parents. They slide it in the front of their binders, and the parent my God, if Casey had a piece of paper that I could go, hey, what does this mean? Whoo, I'd love that day. Like an excuse to just ask her what she's doing. So, yeah, that's fine.
And I don't think we can say a number. We know using them with fidelity, you will see increased outcomes, and you will take it from your students' data. Are you seeing that increase in outcomes? Do you need to add another routine because that would increase even more because they're needing more support detailing out a certain concept?
Yep. I was reticent. I'm going to be completely honest. I'm a secondary person. I lived a lot of years. Don't ask me to do something more. I got a lot to do. This pays off in spades. And I was so personally, as someone who, from an implementer standpoint, I have shared this great and wide. I do a lot of secondary implementation in a lot of different formats with a lot of different things, from everything from foundational literacy to mapping out and getting people to lift their core up to what the actual floor should be. This specific unit organizer helped to facilitate some of the most important questions within a secondary framework. What are we teaching at grade levels? What is the expected learning and understanding? What's the next step? And what do we really want our kids to know and be able to do? Because from that, you can build UDL frameworks. From that, you can align standards to it. From that, you can kind of get this whole concept of learning progressions that are on SAS that are helpful and useful tools, and see how your mapping works out with their mapping. And we get back to curriculum, because what we've got is sometimes in middle school, we've got a lot of drift from standards. And we see that on assessments and lack of achievement. So that's really all I got.
Any other questions, comments?
Okay, well, let's let you go. I am out of the Western office. I work in the Pittsburgh office with Miss Jeannie, who is sitting there, and my email's on the bottom. Andra is
Out of the East.
out of the East. There are a few of us in West who are trained SIN people, a few people in East, a few people in Central office, and then we have a few TACs scattered around the state that if you have some requests, we'll
have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for sharing your time with us.
Yeah.